And welcome to the castle, everybody. This is Nightsaber Z42, and today I'm actually going to show you what's in my RPG collection. So I have this nice little shelf, let me turn around here, that you can see right there behind me. Well, there we go, right there behind me. And so I'm going to actually show you all of the different books that I have, and even some that actually haven't made it to the shelf quite yet because I got no space. Like, literally, this whole entire shelf is filled with stuff. So at the very top, I have my Star Wars FFG source books, all the way from Edge of the Empire to Force and Destiny, and some supplemental materials in between. In my second shelf, I have all of my Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition stuff, along with supplemental material for that as well. Further down below, I have everything else that doesn't quite fit into those two categories. So those will be like your Call of Cthulhu's and even some OSR stuff like Old School Essentials, which is really cool. Further down below, I have my Starfinder stuff, my Pathfinder, and my older Dungeons & Dragons editions, like 4th edition and a couple 3.5 books. Further down below, on the final shelf, I have just some everyday things that I would need, like minis and dice, my dice holder bag, and some wall tiles for building dungeons and stuff. And you can see in the back there I got my map that I made for Mines of Fendover. So I'm going to take you on a quick walkthrough for all of these books that are in my collection. So let's get to it. So I guess some of the things that I'll show you first are actually things that are not on my shelf, that I don't have space for quite yet, but I'm actually trying to make some more space, probably at the bottom. I actually have a lot more books that are actually up in the attic that I had to store. I think these are a lot of my older stuff that I just have no use for anymore, that I'm probably trying to get rid of. So first up is the Tome of Adventure Design, a wonderful book that has hundreds and hundreds of tables for you to flesh out either quick adventures or just whole campaigns, and it's really in-depth. I really enjoyed taking a look through this. Quite a very capable aid for any DM or game master. It's actually system neutral. The Dark of Hot Springs Island, a very fantastic book, nice leather cover, awesome artwork on the inside. I'm definitely going to do a review of this later. And we have my Spectacular Settlements book, which I have been reviewing for the past, I don't know how long, like month or something. And so the full in-depth review will be coming later in a couple weeks. I have this awesome new zine book called Knock, and it's just got such great artwork, oh my gosh, and some really fantastic articles as well. There's The Waking of Willoughby Hall, a nice little adventure. It's about 30 pages long, written by Belle Milton of The Questing Beast. A very fantastic book. I really enjoy this adventure. It's very OSR. I'm actually currently reading through the Candlekeep Mysteries. I have some mixed opinions on this one, but I really do like this book, this special edition book, mainly because it's got the gold on the front, and the gold with the red is just so cool. I normally don't do special editions for the Dungeons & Dragons book, but there's a couple of them that I really, really like. I have Stars Without Numbers. This is a very great OSR sci-fi book. I'm actually going to be creating my own campaign setting. Maybe I'll get to run it someday, maybe not. It's just something that I've always had since I took a trip out to Ireland and Scotland and England. It was just one of these ideas that I had going around in my head. Next, I have this fantastic little, or not little, but great book called Sentinels of the Multiverse RPG. Sentinels of the Multiverse is a card game that you play cooperatively, and you basically have a deck of cards for your hero. Each hero has a different deck, and it's really in-depth. It's very tough, but it's very fulfilling. And now they've actually come up with an RPG that was released in 2020 by Greater Than Games. So very great book. I'm actually going to do a review of this book as well as how to make a character or a superhero. Next we have Ultraviolet, Grasslands, and the Black City, another OSR type game with just some beautiful artwork, and this really fleshes out a land that's just post-apocalyptic. This would be something that has always been said to be a mix of Oregon Trails and just tabletop role-playing. It's just fantastic. I can't recommend this book enough. And last on my table that hasn't been put away is Cyberpunk Red. I've been reading through this one. I actually stopped to read some other stuff, but this book, oh man, some absolutely fantastic artwork. The system seems very interesting as well. I will be doing a review on this one sometime later, although it's not on my to-do list quite just yet. So that's Cyberpunk Red. So going off of my shelf here, I do have quite a bit of stuff, but I actually organized it. I've organized it several times before. So this is my latest inclination of how it's organized. I have all of my Star Wars books up at the top. The right side is actually what I need for my current campaign. And so I have things like Allies and Adversaries, which has a lot of NPCs and bad guys and also some allies, good guys, for your campaigns that have been published in books, but there's also some new ones as well. And I also use Starships and Speeders, which just has stats for a lot of the ships that are in previous books with also some new ones as well. I have the 3 core rule books, which I will actually go in depth and a sort of like a review / tutorial later in this year. But here's the Edge of the Empire one. I also have Forced in Destiny as well as the Age of the Rebellion. And I actually have all of the supplements for the Edge of the Empire because that's what my group is kind of focused on. They use a lot of the Edge of the Empire stuff, so I've actually gone ahead and gotten all of the books like, what is this one? Special Modifications. I think that's the really good one. That's got all of the hacking stuff in it. Dangerous Covenants, if I can read. Fly Casual, also interesting. No Disintegrations. Some of these books are a little for me. They don't really add very much, but they do add new character or player resources. The ones that really change the game, like the Technician's book, would just be really fantastic. And I'll go over these in depth at a later time. I have Force and Destiny, which is the Jedi side of the role-playing game. So if you want to play as a Jedi or Force-sensitive type character, then this is where you would go. The Age of Rebellion is probably the most mayest of them all, is where you would go if you wanted to do a more militaristic style campaign. So if you want to play Rebels or even Imperials, this would be the book to get. And my book is a little bit dinged up, even though I've barely used it. I blame the mail on that one. I also did get Strongholds of the Resistance, just to kind of see how bases were run, because my players did have a base at one point in the campaign, but this book was really It just has different bases. It doesn't really teach you how to make a base. I think one of the other Rebels supplements has that fleshed out. I have the 3 era rule books or supplements, like Dawn of the Rebellion. This is what happens during the rebellion, the early years of the rebellion. So this is actually based off of Star Wars Rebels. There's a lot of characters and also cool items and campaign ideas for that. There's Rise of the Separatists, which is the beginning of the Clone Wars. Very useful information in that, as well as Collapse of the Republic. And I've always been really confused at why they have 2 separate books for like the same war. It kind of makes sense a little bit. I always wish that they would have had like some special edition which just has them all linked together. But it's FFG, they're never going to do that. I also have some more supplements, like the Lords of Nal Hutta. These are your Hut Space type planets and characters. Sins of Fortune, which is the Corellian sector, which my players have never really fully explored, but there's some really good information in there. I have an adventure, The Jewel of Yavin. My players have done this, or a heavily modified version of it, as they'll tell you. Nexus of Power, which is a Force and Destiny book, which has some force-sensitive worlds, like Dagobah is one of them. My favorite one is actually Weik, Weik, which is like a... They don't have any technology whatsoever. It's like a medieval-style era world, but it's very force-awoke, I guess. Oh yeah, I forgot I had this one. Gadgets and Gear. Interesting that. And then I also have a Force and Destiny campaign called Chronicles of the Gatekeeper, which I started running when I was hosting live games, but then the pandemic kind of put an end to that, so I haven't been able to do that since. So those are all of my Star Wars books. So on the second shelf, I have all of my Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition books. Before we actually get there, there's actually some stuff hanging on top of these books, of which is Icewind Dale, Rime of the Frost Maiden. This is the special edition cover, which I've started reading through it just to get some inspiration for my Humblewood campaign. Nothing major, just getting some ideas on how to do a winter theme, or I guess an ice theme. So on top of these books, I have Swords and Wizardry, an OSR style game by Matt Finch. There we go. Very good if you're wanting to get into some really old school Dungeons and Dragons, although this one kind of improves on some of the things that needed a little bit of improvement, and it also gives you some options. So that's Swords and Wizardry. There's Barbarians of the Ruined Earth. I actually really like this theme, and most importantly, I really love this artwork and all of the nods to like 80s style cartoons like Bebop and Rocksteady are in here. Plus, you have like this monster like that looks like a bear that has a snake coming out of it, that has a badger coming out of it, or something like that. It's just really wacky. It's set in a very post-apocalyptic Earth where just anything that can go wrong has gone wrong, and you have like extra-dimensional beings coming in, aliens, and just monsters. And it was quite a fun read. This is a based on the Black Hack system, which I actually have not read through, and I think from what I've read, actually makes improvements upon that system. So these boxes are Dungeons in a Box, and a few years ago I actually had this subscription for Dungeons in a Box, which is where a lot of my, well, not minis, but like flat standees came from. And there's also some really good maps in there, but I went through a whole year for that subscription box, and then I just canceled it because I wasn't going to host any live games, so what was the point? I have the Mini Dungeon Tome. This is basically 130 adventures. They're like really short, 2 pages at the most, of just a really quick dungeon that you can just pull off the shelf and just use. I actually used this for my Humblewood game once. It was like a session 0 just to test characters out. And the really cool thing is they're organized by level, so you'll have all of your level 1 stuff first, and it'll eventually go to level 20. But it's also got it organized by how many player characters there are. So if you have 4 to 6, then this would be a great level 1 adventure for you. So really interesting book. So another supplement, one that I have used before in my live sessions, is the Game Master's Toolbox, Ultimate Bestiary, Revenge of the Horde. This is an excellent book if you have experienced 5th edition players who think they know every beast from the Monsters Manual inside and out like the back of their hand, because it takes those monsters like the Goblins and it makes them more diverse. So for example, for Goblins, there's 4 different types, or 4 different varieties, or maybe it's 3. So you have your forest goblins, you know, the goblins that you find out in the forest. You have your hill goblins, and then you have your cave goblins. And man, my players got freaked out when I showed them the cave goblins for the first time. Basically, think of The Last of Us, and these are the type of goblins that your players can face. It's just really interesting, and I actually love stuff like this. It just changes things up a bit to make things fresh. So on the other side of that is the same thing, the Ultimate Bestiary, but the Dreaded Curse. So this is more of your undead type monsters, and I haven't really gotten the opportunity to use any of these just yet. But you have things like ghosts, ghouls and ghasts, liches, lycanthropes, mongrel folk, mummies, revenants, shadows, skeletons, specters, vampires, wights, will-o-wisps, wraiths, zombies, and animated objects and stuff like that, just to kind of make things a little bit different for your players. I do have, let's see, Mordekainen's Tome of Foes. And this is the special edition cover. So that's 3 special edition covers that I do have, but hey, how could you just say no to this beauty? I have Bolo's Guide to Monsters. Also, I think this one's probably a little bit better than Mordekainen's in my opinion. And I have the Sword Coast Adventures Guide, just to get my players a little bit more options when they're live at the game table. And then we have all the stuff that I actually do use for my current Humblewood game. So let's pull some of these out. Some of these are supplements as well. I have my Humblewood book, my actual campaign book, which I have actually done a review of before, so you can check out that video. Of course, you got to have a Dungeon Master's screen, although I really want to make a better one. Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. So if your players are begging for more stuff or at the table, then definitely get this book. It's basically like Xanathar's Guide to Everything, only more stuff. So my 2 other supplements that I use quite frequently, Remarkable Inns and Their Drinks. A very good book that I've reviewed before. You could check out that video. And Remarkable Shops and Their Wares. Even better than Remarkable Inns because it came later and it seems like they kind of learned a thing or two about style and just information in general. I highly recommend those 2 books, and they're actually doing a campaign or a Kickstarter for something cultist, and they're cultist or something like that, which I've also backed, and I'll be getting that probably at the end of the year. We have, of course, your standard Dungeon Master's Guide, the DMG. You gotta have that. You have the Players Handbook, which you must have, and the Monster Manual, which you kind of need. And actually, one more supplement, one that's a little bit different than your average one, that I've used, I think, once. Well, I've definitely used it once in my Humblewood campaign, is Treacherous Traps. This little book basically has a ton of different traps sorted by levels. So like level 1 through 4, level 5 through 8, and so on and so forth. But the really cool thing about this is it also organizes it by the danger level. So if you have a really super dangerous trap that can one-shot your players, it'll list it like that. Or you could have some traps that just kind of set back, basically. So this is a really interesting book to read through. It also has some information on random traps and creating your own traps. So definitely pick this one up. Although I do recall that there are some trap PDFs on DriveThruRPG as well. And then I have my adventures. Yes, these are the adventures. So I have Ghost of Saltmarsh is not that great, in my opinion. Storm King's Thunder, there's a lot of potential in here. And you have your Waterdeep books, so Dragon Heist, which I can't really remember now. I'll have to reread that one. The Dungeon of the Mad Mage, I've always been a really big fan of the Underdark. I actually have the 3.5 Expedition to the Undermountain book down there, which I got even before I started buying the 3.5 books. You have the Tales from the Yawning Portal, and then Acquisitions Incorporated, which is, I use that more as a supplement. So when I was doing in-person games, those are all of my 5th edition books, at least the ones that I can remember that aren't hiding. So now we get to go even deeper down the shelf. So now we're getting into the 3rd shelf. This is where things get a little bit doozy because there's really no organizational reason behind this. So these are just where the books that don't fit either Star Wars or 5th edition kind of go. So for example, these old school essential books, which are really cool, they're OSR style. I have, let's see, how many do I have? I think I have 6 of the books. I'm missing one. I'm missing the Clerics and Spellcasting Guide. So you have your core rulebook in one book, which is about 50 pages long, or actually about 80 pages long. Then you have your genre rules for like characters creation. So this is where your races would be. You have your treasure book, which has a list of all treasures that your players can get. You have your monster book, which is where all of your monsters are. So I really like this style where you get like these little books, and that way if I have a player who needs to look at, refer to the rules, I can just hand them that book and say, here you go, read the rules. Or if they are basically needing to look something up on their about their character in terms of class or race, I can just give them the genre book and say, here you go. Or even better, if they need to refer to a spell, I can give them the spell book, and that way they can look at it and read it right there. This is the Advanced Fantasy set, which is actually coming out this year, or actually has been released already on PDF. I'm waiting for the hard copies, though. This is the Druid and Illusionist spells. I don't have the Clerics and Magic User spells, unfortunately. That always seems to be out of print. But I do have the Advanced Fantasy Genre rules, which has more classes and races. So that's Old School Essentials. So this is an interesting book. It's called Neverland, and this is basically a hex crawl 5th edition style game set in Neverland, of course, where you'll meet your Peter Pans, your Wendys, your Jonathans and Davids, and I don't even know any of the characters in Neverland in Peter Pan because I never read the book. I tried once. I got to like the second page and got real bored with it real quick. But this book has some gorgeous artwork. It's a very interesting setting to have a 5th edition game in. But what I really love about this book, too, is that each hex has its own page of random things that'll happen, and it has a little blurb about it. I might do a full review of this one later, but moving on. 5 Torches Deep. I wouldn't say this is OSR per se. It's OSR-like, but with 5th edition rules. This has been advertised as if you were having a 5th edition group that you wanted to try OSR style stuff with, this would be the book to go to. I tried it once. I wasn't really that impressed with it overall. If I wanted to do OSR stuff, I would just go into Old School Essentials. But it does have some great artwork, some really interesting ideas for if you are just running a standard 5th edition style game. So there's definitely some takeaways from this book. So now we're going to get into the really weird stuff. So this box set right here is East Texas University, probably the weirdest thing in my collection. This is a really interesting one, and I've always dreamed of running this someday, but basically this is a Savage Worlds product. And the whole premise of this is you're a student at East Texas University, right? But you are also like a monster hunter or like a supernatural hunter slayer. So think of Buffy the Vampire Slayer in a university style setting, and this is pretty much the game that you have right there. This is the box set, so it actually comes with 3 books that have been released for this setting. The map, some dice, some GM screen, and a poker chips, because the Savage Worlds actually uses poker chips. So here's something very interesting. This is Merkburg. Hopefully I pronounced that right, because I can never remember how to say it. Merkburg. This is like a Scandinavian rock metal RPG book. It's very bare bones, and this will probably kick your ass, is pretty much what it is. But what really sets this apart is that every inch of this book has been stylized to be useful. So the front cover and the back cover all have useful information, and the artwork is just gorgeous. Now, forewarning here, if you're a kid, you might want to look away because some of the pictures in here are definitely grotesque. It's a very interesting setting. I wish that they had fleshed the setting out a little bit more, but what is here is very interesting. And there's a really cool adventure called the Rock Black Sludge in the back, which is just a design, a master in design, because you have your map, and then for each room, you have a mini version of that map that's also highlighted with that room, and it's got just bullet point details on what's in that room. It doesn't really give you a lot of fluff text like you see in like every 5th edition's book. It just gives you what you need right then and there. It doesn't waste time. Then there's 1000-Year-Old Vampire. What can I say about this? This is a solo-style journal RPG. So you are a vampire, and you basically keep a diary of your memories. I am planning on doing a playthrough of this in the future. But this is just a really interesting book in general, just because of what you have to do. It's just a journal RPG. You just keep a diary as a vampire, and you do roll stuff on it, and what you roll kind of determines what happens in your life, and it's all about keeping tabs on your memories too. I have this fantastic 2 series book. This is Delta Green. So Delta Green is like Call of Cthulhu, but as an actual organization of humans who are trying to stop all the bad stuff from happening. So you have your handler's guide, which is your GM guide basically, that tells you how to run things, and then of course you have your player's guide, which has character creation. So I really like how they separate character creation from how to play. This is I think the collector's edition, because it came in this really nice cover case, and so this will be another one that I would really like to host a game of someday. And there's also a ton of adventures for this series that have been released on Drive-Thru RPG, so there's not lack of good quality stuff from these guys. So going along with my Sentinels RPG, I actually have Mutants and Masterminds 3rd edition. This is the Deluxe Heroes Handbook, so this is the Players Handbook, and it goes over how to create characters and how to play the game. I wasn't all that impressed when I read it the first time, but there were a lot of things in here that didn't make sense to me that probably would make sense to me now, so I'll have to go back and read this and do a comparison between this one and Sentinels. And then, of course, we have Call of Cthulhu. I have 7th edition. I have whatever edition this is. I believe it's 7th edition. This isn't the 6th edition cover. So that's the Investigator's Handbook. So just like Delta Green, this would be your player's guide to creating a character. And then I have the GM screen, which actually came with a booklet of 2 adventures, Mist Dews and Blackwater Creek. So I have stuff that I could run fairly quickly with that. And then, of course, you have the Call of Cthulhu Keeper's Rulebook. I do also have Doors to Darkness, which has 5 scenarios for beginning keepers. So this is probably also something that I would run personally, because I've never run Call of Cthulhu before. Although, from what I've listened to in podcasts, it doesn't seem fairly more complex than your standard RPG stuff. So this book is very interesting to me. I'm in both system and style of play. This is City of Mist. City of Mist is a noir-style superhero type game, kinda. So let me explain this. In the setting of City of Mist, you play as somebody who has the aspect of a legend. So let's say that I have the aspect of King Arthur in me, and I have some of his personality traits or skills. So that's how it works. This city, which is the City of Mist, has a lot of these people. In fact, they can only live in this specific city. If they go out, then they start to lose that personality. They start to lose that other self. But they can also get lost in that personality and lose their humanity. It's really interesting. I did play a couple weeks worth of adventures with a group, but I had to unfortunately let them go or stop playing with them. Just because I was getting really busy during that summer. It was a great game otherwise. I have my Genesis books. So Genesis is basically like your Star Wars FFG, only this is more genre neutral. This is what you would use if you wanted to create your own genre. So if you wanted to do a sci-fi setting that wasn't Star Wars, you could use this. If you wanted to do a horror style book in just like Star Wars, then this would be it. So it's got a lot of different ideas. I'm really mixed about these products. It seems too broad, is how I would say it. I also have the Expanded Player's Guide, which just adds more stuff. And this is very different than the Star Wars FFG, but also being quite similar. So I have mixed opinions about this, and I'll go into that someday. Tales from the Loop is a very interesting book. This first came out when Stranger Things was really getting popular. And in fact, this is basically Stranger Things, but in a Norwegian. But basically, you play as a group of kids who find weird things happening in their little town. So This has also been adapted to an Amazon series, which I think I watched like one episode of and got bored with. So there's that. Legend of the Five Rings. I've done the beginner adventure for this book. I really love the setting. I love the themes. I don't like the gameplay. That is why I don't run this. And so that's really unfortunate because I was really looking forward to doing some awesome samurai stuff, and it just didn't work for me. So the last few books that I have are very interesting. I have my Savage Worlds Deluxe Explorers book, although I'm probably going to upgrade this to the Adventure book, which is the new one. Blades in the Dark. So you play as thieves in a rather steampunk type city. The gameplay is much different than anything that I remember reading about before. So that's Blades in the Dark. Fate Core System is another genre neutral. This is what you would use if you wanted to build your own setting, but using the Fate system, which I had a problem with when I read it the first time. Although now that I've kind of broadened my horizons a little bit, I think I would kind of take to this a little bit better. I just have to go back and reread it and make sense of things that didn't make sense before. And Monster of the Week. Monster of the Week is pretty much like Buffy the Vampire Slayer. These are like really short campaigns in my opinion. And I really don't care for the gameplay as much as well. Or at least that's what I remember thinking about when I was reading through this book. Those are all of my interesting books that really don't have a place either on my Star Wars shelf, my 5th edition set, or my Pathfinder and older editions of Dungeons & Dragons. So now we're getting to the final shelf of products that I actually have that I'm going to show to you today, starting with Starfinder, the core rulebook. I thought Starfinder was going to be the really next hot thing, and it turned out that it really wasn't. So I actually had a subscription to Starfinder for quite a while, so I have a lot of their products. So this is the core rulebook. There's some really great ideas in here. Ultimately, it's basically a sci-fi Pathfinder. I also have the Alien Archive, at least the first one. There's like a bajillion of them now, which is actually really cool. I just wish that this book had more in it and that there were less of them. Because, let's be honest, if they had just actually come up with the ideas in the first place, they wouldn't need like 5 different books. And I also have the Pact Worlds, which is really interesting. I would actually use this for any sci-fi setting because it's just got ideas for planets that you can use in your whatever sci-fi setting that you're running in. It's got maps, it's got worlds, it's even got starships and stuff like that. It's just a really interesting book, and I actually do plan on using some of the information in here when I actually come up with my own sci-fi setting using stars without numbers. And then you have your adventures, and these little books I had a subscription to, so I do have a full set of the first adventure, and I think I have the full set of the second adventure as well. Would I ever run this game? Probably not. I think there are better sci-fi settings out there than Pathfinder in space. So that's a rather unfortunate one because I had invested quite a bit into it. Gonna show you some of my old stuff. Not old school stuff, but old stuff. I don't care what anybody says. What I'm about to show you next is actually one of the greatest RPG systems in the entire world, starting with 4th edition. That's right, I went there. 4th edition was very awesome. It was innovative. It just was under the Dungeons & Dragons name. If it was by any other name, this system would have better praise. It's very underrated in my opinion. The only problem with it is that it was marketed as Dungeons & Dragons, and it was a very big departure from that. I actually have the Players Handbook, Players Handbook number 3, not Players Handbook number 2, surprisingly enough, the Dungeon Master's Guide, the first Monster Manual right here, and the Dungeon Master screen. And this is the actual edition that I played in college. This is the first full-length, or rather long-style campaign that I've ever played in an RPG. Before, I had done Pathfinder and 3.5, but they never really lasted very long. And those were with family members, of course. The Pathfinder 2nd edition core rulebook. This is the special edition that has 2 bookmarks right there, bookmark ribbons. I've read through this book. It seemed very innovative. Of course, there are some people out there that have played through some of the adventures will tell you that it's just an illusion of choice. And you know what? Yeah, sure. That's like every game. Sorry to burst your bubble. But yeah, that's Pathfinder Core Rulebook 2nd edition. And then my 3.5 edition, this is one of the first books that I've ever gotten, was Expedition to the Undermountain. I read through this book I don't know how many times. This is like, I buy RPG books just to read through them and just, you know, just to get a feel for the setting. And this was one of the first ones that I've ever read through. And this took me to a whole nother world. I loved reading through this, just, you know, seeing, hey, if I were ever to run a Dungeons & Dragons game, how would I do this? I would probably go here and here and here and stuff like that. I love this book. This is like the first book that I've ever gotten for Dungeons & Dragons. Second book I ever got was 3.5, Players Handbook. I have actually played through a couple of short adventures with the 3.5 edition. I don't remember a whole lot about it because that was a long time ago. But just flipping back through some of these pages, it kind of takes me back a little bit. And my gosh, is there a lot of text in here, especially without pictures. So that is 3.5, and that's my entire collection that's on my shelf. I have more stuff. It's in the attic. I'm not going to the attic. So thank you guys so much for watching. Feel free to leave a comment down below. Give this video a huge thumbs up to support this series, and I will see you guys in the next video.